I'm David Robinson, speaking to Lucan as part of the Digbeth Speaks project. Can you just confirm that you're okay with us using this for the purpose of the archives?
I am.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So Madeline's told me a little bit about you, but for the sake of the interview, how did you come to be in Digbeth in the first place?
Okay, well, in the late 80s, my father was asked to advise the city on the creation of a media quarter, and that was part of the Highbury initiative, which was kind of like a pre-runner to the big city plan in a way. And I think that was in 1988, and as a result of he accepted the challenge and started to put together a very well thought through and comprehensive report, and in the process of doing that he had to get to know the various parts of the city, and one of the things that he noticed as he was going around was a building in the jewellery quarter called the Hockley Centre, and it's a big brick building, ground and 7 upper floors, which was about 100,000 square feet and absolutely dominates the middle of the quarter, and it's still there now. It's now painted white, and it had a for sale board on it, and out of curiosity he phoned the agent and said, there's a for sale board in this building, jewellery quarter, how much is it? And the agent said, I'm terribly sorry, I can't tell you that, it's been sold. And he managed to persuade the agent to tell him how much it had been sold for, and he thought the agent got the wrong building because the amount of money was so low. And the conversation kind of went on, and he persuaded the agent to put him in touch with the person who bought the building. He phoned the person who bought the building and said, I want to buy the building you just bought, I'll give you a little turn on the price you paid, and you'll be making a profit for doing nothing before you've even completed the contract, I think. And the guy who had just bought it said, well, no, I'm not really interested in selling it, but I'll tell you what, there's this pile of old crap I've got down in Digbeth that I don't know what to do with, and if you take that off my hands too, I'll sell you the pair. And that was how he got introduced to the custard factory. And he came down to look at it, and at that time, what's now Scott House, or what it was always Scott House, but what's now the kind of original part of the custard factory with the reception in it, where the Café des Artistes was, where the big lake is, that was all a big loading bay. It was on different levels, and part of it was occupied by an industrial company called Johnson Controls on the ground floor only. The vast majority of it was completely empty, full of pigeons and pigeon crap and stuff like that. A lot of broken windows, water coming in through the roof, and it was quite special somehow, because when even on the upper floors then, if you went and stood at one end of the building, you could see pretty much right to the other end, and it just had a sort of, it was very, very charming and nice, even though it was extremely derelict. And
Sorry, how old were you when you first...
So when I first came up here, I was 18 or 19, probably 19, I think.
And what year was that?
That was in 1988, I think, or 89. Yeah, something around there. Probably 89 actually when I came up. And so having got this building and some of the surrounding bits and pieces of it, my father didn't really know what to do with it. The building in the jewellery quarter of the Hockley Centre was very straightforward. It was a multi-occupied building. It was a bit shabby. It had a sort of drab name, the Hockley Centre, and he renamed it the Big Peg, which is a reference to jeweller's peg and whatever. And it was obvious what the business was there. With the custard factory, or that pile of old crap down in Digbeth, as it was thought of, it was not clear at all what should be done with it. And he wondered and wondered and wondered, and over a couple of years, between about 88 and 90, he got approached by various artists and theatre groups and people involved in creative things of one kind or another, to see whether they could come and borrow a bit of space. And he let them in. He's always been interested in arts, antiques, stuff like that. And people started to kind of inhabit the building in a very informal way. And over time, a little community grew up, and a group of theatre students formed the Custard Factory Theatre Company, and they started to feel quite proprietorial about the whole place, as did some of the other people who moved in. And then, despite the fact they were paying no rent, they started to complain about things like the roof leaking, there being no heating, the windows being broken, pigeon crap everywhere, no good toilets, it being generally unsafe, unlit, no emergency lighting, and so on. And it became clear that there was a demand for something, and that there was absolutely no way of addressing that in a conventional commercial way, because the cost of turning it into anything that's usable would be vast. It's a big building, it's 86,000 feet I think. And at that time there was a funding mechanism called city grants, and over a few months an application was put together for a city grant, which was awarded, and then starting in summer of '92 we started the conversion of the building. Just before that we'd been looking for an architect to work on the project, and down in London my father came across a young guy called Glenn Howells, who was originally from Stourbridge but was living in Brixton and working in Belsize Park, strangely, which was pretty near where I grew up. Father interviewed various people, Glenn amongst them, and I remember doing the final interviews on it, and we gave Glenn a job. And so Glenn came back to the West Midlands, and we set up a site office in what is now 422 in Scott House, and Glenn was the architect, I was doing all the contracting stuff, and we had 100 guys working for us direct. There was no sort of outside contractors. It was very tough economically at the time. It was pretty sort of desperate times, particularly for the building industry, and we had a complete hoot. I was 22 or something. Glenn was much older, obviously, and we had. It was a very sort of intense experience doing it all. We had a very, very tight budget, and we just did it all in a very direct way.
How long did it take, Lucan?
We finished in August '93. And that was pretty much when the Café des Artistes opened, actually. And so, for the benefit of the recorder, I will tell you again that what happened with that was there was a lady called Anne Galloway who was working as a PA for us and helping with the development process, the whole thing. And she said halfway through the job that she fancied having a go, because it was clear that we needed a cafe of some kind, and she fancied having a go at running it. And so the name Café des Artistes, which is sort of ridiculous and pretentious, really, because there needed to be a statement. There was no good cafe in the centre of Birmingham at the time. I was living here, and it was certainly the case that if you wanted to get a pint of milk after 6 p.m, you actually had to drive out of the city centre to one of the nice suburbs to find anything that was open. The city just shut down in the middle in those days. So Anne opened that when the whole project opened, and it all went very well in most respects, certainly in the sense that the place filled up very, very quickly. It became clear that there had been a demand in the city for a place for creative people to congregate, which hadn't really been given a place to happen before.
Big memory of Digbeth is the coach station, the original coach station, and beside that coach station there was a very, very famous bar which is now called the Dubliner. Before that, I'll come back to me the name of the bar, but the bands that used to play there were phenomenal. So I saw Nico from Velvet Underground, Smiths, the Swans, some very, very famous, and then the Institute across the road from it as well was always either a social area or fundamentally became nightclubs. So people got as far as that bit of Digbeth purely because either you were going to a gig, the Irish Centre behind it used to put on gigs, Bradford Street, there was a brothel there called Tin Can. But again, I saw some phenomenal bands. So you go up these 3 flights of stairs, and the stage had a big love heart, and the girls would still be there trying to get young boys to sleep with them because it was a captive audience. But again, saw the Waterboys there, Three Johns there. So the area's always been synonymous with, to a certain degree, factories and little happenings.
So what time period were you thinking of there?
That would be 30 years ago.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
you know, arriving into Digbeth, the bus depot was hilarious. You know, it's quite strange, and definitely that much more of an Irish community as well. Because when we do the Irish Day Parade now, you're talking 5th, 6th, 7th generation. Then you were talking maybe 2nd, 3rd generation. So mums and dads had been brought up in Ireland and had come over. So there was a different feel to Digbeth, a bit nitty gritty, but it's always quite safe. There's a Polish club as well, which would be interesting for you to go and see. So a lot of Polish immigrants come to Birmingham. That whole bull ring was again very interesting because it kind of it sort of cut off Digbeth as it all has done again with the bull ring, but it was that series of underpasses
that was grim, wasn't it?
Which was very grim. So you kind of had to go through underpasses to actually even pop up to Digbeth. So it was quite an odd, scary kind of space. But I think that kind of always suits certain underground clubs and bars anyway, so I think you were kind of left to your own devices. So there was always a very, very healthy music scene going on down this side of town. There was also some very, very famous boxing pubs. And the Crown was very famous for its boxing. And again, there's a number of little gyms around here. Again, Digbeth is synonymous with Birmingham City Football Club. A wee bit like Aston with Aston Villa. There's a bit where there's a community of people that kind of, you know, sort of walk through there. So sometimes the busiest times in Digbeth is match day, and it is interesting to come down on a match day when Blues are playing at home, because you'll just see thousands and thousands of people coming down Digbeth High Street, and they're the one. There's pubs here that's how they survive, purely once every 2 weeks they'll sell out.
Just sorry to pause you there. I realised we didn't get your consent.
I've just written Dave's name on the form.
Okay.
So I think if you put that in the mix, and then put also in the mix that before the bull ring, now as we know it, town was more pushing towards Broad Street with the Hyatt and Ronnie Scott's, and Digbeth was kind of sidelined. So you really did have to make an effort to go down there. Tons of manufacturing though. I mean, this building.
Automotive components.
It was phenomenal. I mean, it was like going back in time, and that was only 5 years ago where they had the fly presses. It looked as if you were going into the 1930s. You know, in some of these machines. It was like, so there's a bit where synonymous with manufacture, synonymous with this idea that, you know, big Irish community, synonymous with the bus depot and the live venues.
What about, Dave, you know, just going back to 93 when you arrived at the custard factory, and I was thinking about, we were talking about Anne Galloway and Des Artistes and all that sort of stuff, and you said you went there when you were 16, which means that it survived at least 3 years, given how old you are. I don't remember it lasting that long with Anne, because excellent hostess she wasn't very good on the business side of things.
No, she wasn't.
But I mean,
I think the big thing, and I think was when Custard Factory first opened, the Digbeth High Street was Digbeth High Street I was talking about. So, and the old Bird's Custard Factory was derelict until Lucan and his dad comes up. It's very, very interesting. And what was interesting about it was you had to take even that extra bit of time to go into the first development, which was Scott House. So you kind of felt you'd suddenly appeared in a completely different space. you knew your navigation because of the area,
Yeah.
but this was a little secret, and I think there was a bit where I don't think it was genuine, but I think it was a bit of marketing where this was the first space in Birmingham that was neutral ground for bands, artists, and it was a good offer. So there was 150 studios.
Yeah.
So suddenly you're not, it wasn't slightly Beirut, but suddenly you've got dance classes, you've got the first cappuccino to be sold in Birmingham. You've got a restaurant that failed, unfortunately, as well.
But
So
it was marvellous.
But was marvellous.
Yeah.
Was hilarious. We had Margaret Street, who was BCU's art college. They decamped to Custard Factory while they were doing up the building. You had tenants coming in that were, I would say, probably more artisans, so people that were not just designing, but they were designing and making. So whether that was recording a record, physical recording, or making clocks, or creating art, or being a service to the community, arts community, so whether they were stretching canvases, or whether they were framing pictures. So it was a kind of sort of one space that actually these artists and these people were spread throughout Birmingham. So it really gave us a focal point to them meeting each other.
Yeah.
And there is this sort of idea that you did know you were in somewhere quite special because of that, and because that was in Birmingham as the backdrop. And I think sometimes we forget that we did so many deals with, or still are, with a lot of the manufacturers around the area. So a lot of the carpets were marked from Bullring, the Hawks, they did the balconies, and you kind of bumped into people that were sort of had that local knowledge. And I guess it's that whole thing where now we can all go onto the internet and Google whatever. You kind of met interesting people because they'd made the effort to go and see that band.
Actually, William Hawkes, as far as history goes, there's a. Do you know that? They're kind of behind the Old Crown, sort of. You get past the Old Crown, if you come from the Custard Factory, a couple of doors up on the left, and they've got a yard you go into, and they're blacksmiths, and they are third generation, I think, on that site. And they, they know
really
the area.
interesting to talk to you.
Yeah.
And I think that connection, if you go further up with Stratford Road, so there's Onslow motorbike shop, which is very, very famous in Birmingham as well. Onslow's, he died when he was 104. He was was still riding the motorbike at 102. Seriously. And then I met him once with his boys, he called them, and they were in their 80s. So, you're kind of going, okay. And he lived above the motorbike shop. So there's a real sort of it is a sort of neutral ground, because I think if you go back further, you'll find that it was quite densely populated with houses as well. We were just remembering, and this would only be 10, 12 years ago, that beside the Crown was 5 terrace houses where the car park is.
Yeah.
So there's a bit where Custard Factory, what I remember of it, kind of opened up this side of town is actually your little playground. And I think Benny, to a certain degree, when he arrived, enjoyed sitting in the space, and he'll tell you that directly. He's going to tell us, wow, I think I'm quite lucky to have this space. And Benny gave away a lot of space to begin with.
Yeah.
So there's a bit about populating empty spaces, and just being that little kernel where people gravitate towards. And you see that in every city anyway, but I think there's a bit where that, I think for the first time in a long time, that was Birmingham's little magnet.
You were certainly missing in Birmingham up to that point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, and from there, I think you met friends and met people we've had nearly every European city come to Custard Factory. Going, what the hell are you doing? Because it's a private company doing things that maybe you would think your city councils or governments would do. And I guess our argument would be if they did do it, they'd do it wrong. And it wouldn't have that sense of independence. And I think the things that I remember our first party in 93. It went on for 20. Kitchener. Yeah. But no, but the big party that we put on with Simon Jones before Simon Jones had Met Bar. That went on 24 hours. No, we didn't have a license for it.
How do you think things have changed, Dave? If you fast forward 20 years, and that sort of, the friendship-based community you've talked about at Custard Factory specifically, how do you see that has evolved to now?
Well, it constantly changes. I think that's where you can't. There's a bit where you build a new building, and then suddenly this is 5 years old, and it creates a new audience. And when we opened Greenhouse 10 years ago, it created the street. When you did Devonshire House, suddenly we were on the high street. So there's a dynamic about building buildings that creates a new community. There's definitely, I feel, there's a new community there now, which is very interesting. So there's a lot of young businesses. There's a lot of businesses now that actually don't survive on local trades in regards to maybe 20 years ago. So the frame maker basically made frames for local artists. Now our businesses are dealing with London, New York, whereas all these different cities selling their ideas, selling their website designs, selling their products. So you've got Jacob Kinney's last show was in South Africa. He's shown at London Fashion Week. So there's a bit where, and I think people are a lot more, slightly more busy than maybe they used to be. Which is not a bad thing, but I think there's sometimes very difficult to sort of recreate that intimacy, which is a problem we've talked about.
I think it's partly the scale, and it was also to do with the fact that it was new and hadn't existed, and it felt revolutionary in a way, didn't it?
But I think,
and also we did feel back then, and you came to the Café des Artistes, it did feel like you could do what the hell you wanted. If you wanted to smoke a spliff, you smoked a spliff, you didn't worry about it at all.
Yes.
Because it was we declared independence pretty much from the rest of the city and the country. It was its own place.
Yes.
And we don't, it's not quite like that now because we've got bigger.
I think
following on from that, how do you think that it feels different these days? You talked about how it is different.
I think it feels a bit bigger, and also the mainstream has kind of come round to what the Custard Factory was all about in various different ways. Certainly the property industry has come round to the idea of multi-let buildings. In the late 80s, people thought that developments with more than a certain number of tenants, particularly small tenants, were terrible, and you couldn't get banks to lend you money to finance them and all that sort of thing. And the whole property industry has moved, and now multi-occupied is very good. I think the whole thing with recognition in creative industries being a driver of economic growth has happened. It wasn't really recognised then. And of course now we've got digital, which we didn't have before. And it's interesting that the community here has gone from being creative and artistic to creative and digital. And so digital is now a major part of what goes on in Digbeth. And hopefully when digital is old-fashioned in 10 years and something else is new-fashioned, hopefully Digbeth can stay that way. I think the thing that I'm very conscious of is that places that in other cities that have been the kind of wild, exciting place for a period have then become more grown up and got quite boring, like Covent Garden in London. And we'd like to keep it a bit not too grown up. For as long as possible, and certainly to keep out the kind of mainstream housing developers and things like that. Because when they arrive and start building their blocks of orange brick one-bed flats, it's time to go and do something else, really, because it's just, it gets very generic and boring. And I think that's the essence that runs through everything in Digbeth. Certainly everything that we're trying to do in our bit of it is that it must not be generic. It's got to be something which has some interest to it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to back that up, is a working community, so it's not going against the grain of what Digbeth has historically been, been in the past. You stick people that are coming in and actually making things or going to work. Lucan is right. Suddenly look at Brick Lane or your East End of London. City boys all want to live there. They're obviously pushing the prices of apartments up. London's a different animal, but I think there's a bit where you go, we've been asked that before, are you worried about gentrification of an area? And it's like, f*** off, bring it on to a certain degree. But there's a bit where, luckily, Lucan's got the freehold of 15 acres, so actually there is some very exciting projects out there, how to live, how to work, how to compound to be a
different
destination.
takes on the mainstream things.
I'm very aware that you need to go, but just one final question, I suppose. You've been talking about the future of Digbeth, and I was just wondering whether you can explain a bit more about how you see or describe what you see the future of Digbeth
Well,
being.
I mean, the very long-term future is impossible to know, and if we could have a kind of set plan, it would be self-defeating, because we don't want to be too, like a big corporation about things. But over the next 5 years, what we would like to see happen is to double the size of the working community here. We've got a couple of thousand people at work directly on our estate in buildings that we've done things with, and that's taken 20 odd years to happen, and there was a kind of inertia at the beginning in getting established, so we've gone through the initial inertia, that's a good phrase, and then obviously the financial crisis 2008, that kind of put a block on any big capital projects. But I hope that what we're going to be able to do now is to unlock some of the potential that we've got here, and tap into the digital revolution that's happening. And I think it's, it's not true really, but there's some truth in saying that Digbeth is a recession-free zone because of the nature of what people here are doing. And I think we want to harness that energy and see the place get more intensively used, and become a real neighbourhood that's recognised not just within the city but around the country and wider, hopefully, and by means of doing that add a certain cool factor to Birmingham's reputation, because Birmingham deserves better treatment in people's minds around the country, certainly, and it struggles, and people just don't perceive it as a cool place. There's loads of cool stuff happening, but somehow the message doesn't get out, and I think we can maybe be a conduit for some of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.